Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today, no matter what it is you're doing. For the free tutorial here on YouTube today, I'd like to share my hint of a heart earring design with you. Now, I'll give you a much closer look at that in just a second, but the idea with this piece is that you can use up just a couple of beads and some tiny scraps of wire for some very simple and very quick to make earrings. Let's head down to the board and take a closer look. So I've just got some scraps of wire. I'm using different colours so it's easier to see where the weaving takes place. And we're going to make these hint of a heart earrings. Quick to make, very, very low on actual item usage. So let's just pop those side by side up at the top there so you can keep an eye on them. Now they don't need to be perfectly identical, but in order to give us the best chance, we're going to start off with two lengths of 1mm or 18 gauge wire. That's around about 5 inches I'm using. You could probably get away with slightly less than that if you're making small earrings. And we're going to give them both a quick warm through. Now both of these lengths have already been flush cut at the ends to give us a head start, and I'm going to be using a couple of different tools today. So you could use your multi-step bail makers. These are fabulous. You've got 6 sizes. Or you could use your little memory wire pliers. I'm going to be using a combination of both of those tools, but you could simply use round nose pliers if that's what you have available. So in order to give us a good start on getting these looking relatively similar, we're going to make some loops on the ends of the wire. So I'm going to use the smaller side. It's about 2 or 3mm on the pin just there, and I'm going to rotate that around to make the beginning of a little loop. It's not quite closed up because I want to do a little further work to it in a second. I'm going to do the same thing again on that smaller pin. Again, you could use your round nose pliers. So already you can see that these are very different to one another. So we're going to take a moment to ensure that these look as similar as possible. So I'm just going to push that wire around, give it a warm through. Now these are scraps of wire, so they have seen a little bit of action and therefore they're a little bit tense. So what I'm going to do is just take a second to get that to look as similar as possible. Just going to put a little bit more of a bend in this one to see if I can get them to line up. And then just for this segment of the tutorial, I'm going to use those wires stacked one on top of the other. And in that way, we should end up with two forms that are relatively similar. So I'm going to use my bent chain nose pliers to just rotate those wires around. You might need to do bits of this side by side and then drop them back onto the top of one another, just so that you can see how close they are. Now you can obviously take a lot more time than I am if you wish to, but basically it's close enough. There is some deviation, but I'm not going to allow that to worry me. Like I say, you could take a little bit more time to get those identical if you wanted to. So what we're going to do here is just bring this around to make the first lobe of the heart. And you can do that with your pliers or with your fingers, really whatever makes sense to you. So there's the first half of the heart. It's a bit of a funny shape at the moment. Like I say, you can take a little more time to get that to look nice if you wanted to. So let's just give that a quick squish. And then what we're going to do is to start bringing that wire away. If you imagine that's the first half of the heart, what I'm going to do is try to bring that down in line with what would be underneath the join. So let's just turn them over the other way for a second. It's much easier for me to do this because I'm right dominant. I'm going to put a lot of warmth into the next section of wire just at the base of the heart, because we're going to pop a little loop-de-loop down at the base. So you can see we've got the first half of the heart there. It's a little bit gnarly at the moment, not going to let it worry me. I'm going to pinch the wire just down at that base, turn those two tails over, and I'm going to bring the front wire around the front and then the second wire around the back. And again, you can get them to be a little bit more perfect than I am. You can bring them up to your face, which I obviously can't do because there's a camera in the way. And again, you can take these apart and just play with them individually until one sits on top of the other, as similar as possible. So your ideas of symmetry are what count to you. I would definitely just kind of take a few minutes to get that looking a little bit more how I want it to. And then I'm just going to pinch those two side by side to bring the wire, again you will need to warm it, just up and over the top of the design. So I'm putting a lot of warmth into this because, as I said before, these are scraps from my scrap pot. So they're a little bit uncooperative. You could probably practice with nice soft wire to see how you go. So what I'm going to do here is a little bit of a wire working finagle, which means that I don't actually know what that word means. We can just smooth that around and then pull that until it sits to be the other side of the heart. Now at this point I will drop one out of the way because it's much easier to get this last part done without the two side by side, but you can constantly drop one back on top of the other and check that they're close enough for you. Now at the moment you can see that that left side is much higher than it ought to be, so I'm just going to draw that gently around just by pinching firmly over here. That looks a little bit more like it. So I'm going to create another loop now, but rather than bringing it down inside, I'm going to turn it up and away. And I think I'll use the larger side of my little memory wire pliers. Just get that to sit in the middle, in the cleft or the cleavage of the heart, and draw that all the way around, like so. And then you can just play with that until it sits how you think looks nicest. And then I will just pinch that top section so that I have an opportunity. Just pinch that wire and draw it around slightly so you complete a circle within that circular form up at the top before trimming away. You'll then need to repeat on the second half and you've still got a little bit of wire left over. Happy, happy. Let's pop that to one side. Probably not quite enough for what we need, so I'll find another scrap in a moment. I'm just going to give that a quick squish down and then I'll repeat to create the second heart as well. So I've just taken a couple of seconds to get those looking a little bit closer to being the same enough as when they're on opposite sides of the head at least. And what I'm going to do is just very, very quickly hammer most of the frame apart from that bit where we just did the loop down at the base. I can show you that very, very briefly before we step on to the next move. So I'm just going to protect that bit where the wire crosses over the remainder of the wire, just holding it off the edge of the block. And just giving that a very gentle tippy tap. Let's get the block out of the way. So I'll show you how similar mine are. They're not completely similar, but it's close enough for me to move on. You can see that one's got a slightly smaller loop than the other one. Something that I want to draw your attention to at this stage is that I've elevated the loop up at the cleft of the heart, up at the top, so that there is a gap between that last little tail of the loop itself and the side or the lobe of the heart. So we're going to just work on one of these and you will need to repeat on the other side. We're going to be using now some 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire, and I have two 3-inch scrap lengths. Again, this is a scrap, so it's a little bit tense already, but when I'm working with anything finer really than a 24 gauge wire, I don't pre-warm it. Really, I try to handle it as little as possible because overwarming it is not any good for it. It will make it weaker in the long run, a little bit more brittle. So I'm going to start halfway along my thin wire, that 26 gauge wire, and I'm just going to push that over the top, sit it over the top, above and below where those two loops are. Let's get this in the best light. And I'm going to start by wrapping 5 times with the right hand wire. Now you can obviously return this in the opposite direction if you wish to. We might just take it a little bit further over. So there's about 1/3 going off to the right and 2/3 of that thin wire going off to the left. So with the tail on the right, which is about 1/3 of the fine wire, I'm going to wrap 5 times around that little section of the hammered frame. We're going to get that nice and neat and tidy. You might prefer to use pliers to help you get right in there. And what you'll notice is every time I wrap around that heavier frame, I'm going to scooch it with my nail. Push the tail up, in and around. That's a 4th wrap. And then I'm just going to scooch that around one last time. I'm just going to leave that tail on for a second, and then I'm going to rotate the project around in this orientation. And what we're going to do is we're going to wrap 3 times around both the top central loop and the other side of that heart design. So if I push the wire down and through, then I'm going to bring the tail up inside that looped section, pull that nice and firmly into position, push the leading edge down inside the frame, This is too small to push the leading edge up through, so I'm going to pull that up instead. Push that wire down. So we've got 3 bands that sit around both the side of the heart and the loop. And then I'm going to push the leading edge down one more time and finish with 5 wraps on the other side of the heart. So let's push that down. That's 3 wraps. Scooch those up so they're nice and neat and tidy. 4 wraps. And then push that through one last time. So there are 5 wraps now on this heart shape. Push everything so that it's nice and neat and tidy. You will have gaps in some positions because you've got tails of wire to work with. But once you're happy with the banding and the positioning, 5 wraps on either side and 3 wraps banding them both together. Grab your favourite flat facing pliers. In this instance, I'm going for my bent chain nose pliers and I'm giving that a really nice squish. It's not too hard, just enough to kind of set those bands in place. What we'll do then is just trim away those 2 wires so that the end sections sit preferably inside the frame of the heart, and in that way they shouldn't cause any harm or damage. So let's just rotate that around a moment, find that end section and make sure it's tucked neatly against that heart-shaped frame. Let's bring this other side around and the same for this one. So tuck it down against the frame and you can give that another little squish once you're happy. You will then need to repeat with your second heart shape. And what I like to do with this design is have the little loop on opposing sides. So I've got the loop on the left lobe on this one and the loop on the right lobe on this one. So I will now repeat the same thing we just did, but in reverse, in mirror, making this the upside, so 3 bands around both the inside of the loop and the frame, and then 5 single wraps on either side of the upper edge of the heart design. So I've just completed the same banding and wrapping technique on the second heart form. Just something to watch out for is that you're not pressing too hard when you're setting that wrapping. Whenever you compress wire on wire, you have the possibility of causing a fracture or creating weakness in the wire. So it is a very, very gentle little squish just to set primarily the banded section where we wrapped 3 times around both pieces of the frame. Just go gentle on that one and let's move on to the next step now. So I have my symmetrically opposed little heart forms. What we're going to do now is to just twist that little loop down at the bottom. And we're going to just make that base of the heart just a little bit tighter and a little bit more pronounced. And what we will do for this is very, very simply pop our pliers across the surface of the loop, minding to not go too close to that crossover point. We're going to pinch the heart frame and then we're going to twist 90 degrees, and that gives us a loop down at the base. If I show you that sideways, you can see it's a very gentle twist. A lot of people working with wire can be a little bit brutal with it, and all you do is you end up with a fracture point. So I'll just show you on the opposite side, because this wrapped in the opposite direction, what I'm going to do is just hold this upright, grip the piece like so, and you can see the front wire here. That needs to go further around. If you do this in the other direction, you're undoing your heart. So we're adding a little bit of extra twist down at the base. So one will twist to the right and one will twist to the left because we created those forms at the same time and one wire went behind or one wire went in front. So they should be ready for us to create the next step. For the little dangle down at the bottom of the design, which you don't have to add, they're quite cute as they are, but if you do want to add them, I'm going to be using some short scrap lengths. These are 3 inches, and I'm going to use a 20 gauge or 0.8mm gauge wire, purely because I want to use some teeny tiny beads. I've got a larger bead and a smaller bead, and I've got a pair of them because I like them to match on earrings. So we're going to make a really teeny tiny little hint of a heart down at the bottom as well. So again, I'm going to be using my memory wire pliers just to create a rounded form that just touches back towards itself, and you'll need to do 2 of these. You can use round nose pliers, or you can, like me, use your little memory wire pliers or multi-step bail makers. So if I just hold the wire, making sure that that end section does touch the pass of wire as it comes away. Let's just move that in the light. I'm going to hold thus across the wire and bring that back up towards itself. getting quite a nice little point down at the base. Now if that isn't as pointy as you want, you can just open and close that slightly, give it a squish, grip very firmly and pinch the end just gently. It might twist, but you can straighten that up and you'll get a bit of a point down at the base. Now you can simply use a head pin for this design if you prefer. And now I'm going to use the same pliers as I did before to just create a curve on the rest of that wire, bringing that around, rotating it until you get a vaguely symmetrical little heart. You can go completely quirky if you want to. That needs to be just slightly smaller, so if I just push the wire around, that sits a little bit more evenly, repeating on the second section of wire. If I'm happy with that roundness just on the lobe of the heart there, I'm going to give that a quick squish, because bearing in mind we are working with a lighter wire now. So let's pinch just in the centre, in the cleavage of the heart, and bring that back up the centrepiece. And you can give that a tiny squish, or you can indeed, if you wish to, just give that a little hammer as well. I might need to just bring that down slightly more into the middle, draw the wire back up, and just mess with that until it sits perfectly. If I was going to make these to sell, I would absolutely be hammering that heart shape so that it keeps its form. Let's just give that a quick squish. Now the reason I use quite a tiny bead, and again why I'm using that 0.8 wire, is that I like that bead to sit down in the centre of the heart design. Put my hand underneath because it's a light coloured bead, you'll see that a bit better. And then you can add whatever larger bead you want above it, or a funny shaped bead indeed. And I'm just going to go for a simple loop that is in the same orientation as that heart form. So I'll put my nail over the top of the bead to protect it from the pliers, draw the wire out to one side, and then I'm going to use the other side of my memory wire pliers just to create a round form. Draw that wire all the way round underneath. If you wanted to, you could pop this onto the heart design and then go for a wrapped loop. But for today, I'm just going to trim that away and make a simple loop. So we've got almost an inch of wire still available to us. So do experiment with the tiny scraps of wire that you have left over from other projects. The main thing is that the loop up at the top is in the same orientation as that heart design. Give that a really firm squish this time, protecting your bead while you're doing it, and then open that up like a jump ring, slide it into that loop we created down at the bottom of your hint of a heart shape, close that up, and you are golden. So we've done one. I'll do the other one off camera in a second, and I'll pop photos up at the end of the video. I hope that you've enjoyed my hint of a heart earring design project. Have yourself the most beautiful day, and I'll see you back here on the Gemhawks YouTube channel very soon. Bye for now.